The Kinder Morgan pipeline, like 263 court decisions before it, went in favor of the First Nations that opposed the project. One court decision after another is shaping the way Canada can and does develop its resources. The failure of governments and corporations to embrace First Nations as full partners is putting the brakes on development, and it is impacting Canada's reputation as an investment environment. Joe Dion, the CEO of the Frog Lake First Nation Energy Resource Corporation, has a plan he shared with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. A First Nations energy strategy framed as a treaty between the Government of Canada and Indigenous peoples, a treaty that will reopen the door to resource development. To do so, he says it's time to create ownership opportunities that provide First Nations access to economic opportunities that will create ownership, employment, funds for education, clean water, and will combat poverty. We invited Joe Dion, the CEO of the Frog Lake First Nations Energy Corporation, to join us for a conversation that matters about his plan to unlock the logjam of court cases and open a path to reconciliation.
Conversations That Matter is a partner program for the Centre for Dialogue at Simon Fraser University. The production of this program is made possible thanks to the support of the following and viewers like you.
Chief Dion, welcome to Conversations That Matter.
Thanks, Stuart. Good morning.
We're at a very interesting point in our next step forward to what I hope will be true reconciliation between Indigenous peoples in Canada and all of those who came afterwards, some of them to colonize and others just to come and call Canada home. But as Chief Perry Bellegarde from the Assembly of First Nations pointed out, when you take a look at Indigenous communities' quality of living versus non-Indigenous quality of living, we're looking at a tremendous gap. Sixth in the world with non-Indigenous peoples, 68th in the world for Indigenous communities. You have a plan that you say can lift those communities out of poverty and benefit all of Canadian society. What do you see as the path forward?
I think the path forward, Stuart, is to get the governments, in this case, the federal government and the provincial governments, leadership in those governments, the Prime Minister and the premiers, to really start taking the subject of Indigenous rights and Indigenous issues seriously. They say they do, and there's some tinkering going back and forth on some legislative issues and some policy issues, and discussions around partnerships with industry and whatnot. But that's not really where the crux really happens. What needs to happen is we need to become equal partners in this country. We need to become full partners in this country. And that means within Confederation, that means to be able to have powers that can basically work with other jurisdictions in this country, whether it's provinces or with the federal government. And the next step basically is equity. Equity in a sense that First Nations, Indigenous peoples have a stake in the resource space. And we have a stake now, which is why the court cases are coming on side with us. That we need the governments and industry need, I guess, as much as you can say, our consent, because the court cases are stopping these projects. So what we're looking for is to lift the poverty, to lift the First Nations and the poor folks in our communities, is to be able to have a revenue stream coming to their communities where they can build hospitals, they can build their own schools, they can build their own roads, and actually have jobs, long-term jobs, that they could start using those revenue streams to look after their families. And right now, at a point in history, there was a time when the level of wealth or poverty, you might say, was equal with non-Canadians and First Nations. But all of a sudden, the non-First Nations took off. The Industrial Revolution came along, and they got lifted up, and we got left on reserve, standing still. Nothing moving, and we had to have license. We had to have a license to go sell our cows. We got when we were successful farmers, we got stripped of our farming implements.
Right.
So so basically, we got pushed down, stepped on, basically.
Yeah.
In order for the others to advance, and that's really what's happened.
I just got to get you to hang on for a second while we take a quick commercial break.
Okay.
We'll be right back. Sorry for the interruption, but I need your help. I'm asking you to support the show by becoming a patron. That means pledging $1 per show. Conversations is a unique program. There's no grandstanding, no arguing, no yelling. Instead, I sit down with people who have unique insights, specialized knowledge, and experiences that inform and enlighten. And we do this on an incredibly limited budget with a very small crew. Well, this is my office, and it's where I edit the show. And then once it's ready, we give it away. You know, so many different websites around the world are carrying the show, but they get it for free. They don't pay us. So I'm asking you to pledge $1 per show by going to patreon.com/conversations that matter. Thanks. We want to keep producing conversations, and with your help, we can. Now let's get back to the show. Over the last 35 plus years, starting, I think, largely with Sparrow, then Delgamuukw, and now the Silcotin land claims decision, that has all changed. And there's been another 245 or 250 court cases
and counting,
where all but I think 3 or 4 court cases have, the courts have come down on the side of the indigenous communities that are involved, saying to those companies and local governments, you have to not just engage, but you have to work with. But now I think post-Silcotin, it's like, it's not just consent, it has to be cooperation.
Big time.
But is that enough? Because I don't know that cooperation is enough. And what I look at what you're doing at Frog Lake with the Energy Resource Corporation, you are saying, no, we need to be owners.
Exactly.
And so what are the benefits that come out of that when you actually, you know, as a band or as a community say, this is ours? And like, how does that make a significant difference?
It's a small example, Stuart, of where Frog Lake is. We have a land base of 60,000 acres of land, and there's 3,000 people. Half of those live off the reserve, half live on the reserve. And we happen to occupy a land where there's lots of oil in place. We've been able to partner.
This is oil in the ground.
Oil in the ground,
yeah.
Inside the reservation.
Yeah.
2 billion plus barrels of oil in the ground. Not all of it extractable, but certainly we've been averaging on 5-6% of that. We think with new technology we can get more.
Is it a light crude?
No, it's heavy.
Heavy crude, okay. But it's not tar sands or oil sands.
It's oil sands. It's oil. It's heavy oil.
Yeah.
But we can produce it with coal production. So we've been doing that for the last 25 years. And with partners from China, partners from Calgary and other places, 6-7 partners we have, and basically with their technology and their know-how, they come in and in the process, our folks learn the process. So we've gone from 25 barrels a day to almost 3,000 barrels a day. Cumulative production about 10,000 barrels a day with the whole community. I mean, with all the land base. The wealth we created, Stuart, over the last 10 years has been tremendous. Housing has been built, roads have been built, education has been paid for with these resources. But that's a small example of ownership, as they say, and that's just oil. Not counting the other, whether it's gas or whether it's hydro or forestry or whatever. And what I am saying is, because of the rights extend off the reservations, off on our traditional lands, I'm advocating that we should get a piece of that action, whether it's 5, 6, 7%, whatever it might be. But basically, it's a pie. I always say there's a pie here, and we need to cut that pie up so industry can make their money, the feds can get their tax base, royalties to the provinces can be created, but there's a revenue stream that should come to the communities, which we then use to create to build our communities with, basically.
But are you seeing some of that money right now? Or is the equation still unbalanced?
In a fraction of a way, there is some awakening by industry folks. One of the companies that happens to have a SAGD project, which is a steam-assisted gravity system, where they steam the oil on the ground. We are getting a revenue stream from that from that production, but we also have we own the cogeneration facility that powers the steam in that project. So that's a steady revenue stream.
Because you're selling power.
We're selling power to the company, but we need to have this happen right across the board, especially now with the issue around with issue of pipelines and tidewater access.
Yes.
I think that's key right now. So we can move this oil to Asia, India. We can get a better price for our oil. It'll lift the price of oil in Alberta, in Saskatchewan. It'll create more jobs. It'll create more jobs in BC. It'll create more jobs actually across the country. I mean, oil is the biggest economic driver right now in the country.
Yes. So it's my understanding that you went to the Prime Minister and you said, here is a plan to help you unlock the Canadian economy, but you can't do it without us.
You know,
what was in that plan?
It was a very, very brief meeting. Basically, I call it a treaty.
Yeah.
It's a First Nations National Energy Strategy that we developed along with the top 10 oil producers in this country, where we talked about requiring the Prime Minister to request for our consent, basically to move to get access to the resource base in the country, and that includes Fort McMurray, Coal Lake, across Alberta. There's a lot of oil still in the ground there, and basically we're looking for his request for consent. And we in turn would provide our consent, but in the process we would basically work out a long-term equity revenue deal for our nations, but also all the nations across, in this case, Alberta.
Right.
But we were actually in discussions with some BC chiefs, for some Saskatchewan chiefs on this whole concept. And I think that idea, Stuart, is going to come along, because I think we can keep going to court.
Yeah.
Those court cases will keep winning, but at the end of the day, it's not going to solve the issue. So I am going to be working with some leadership certainly from Alberta, hopefully BC, and hopefully across Saskatchewan, and hopefully get the federal government, the Prime Minister, maybe the Minister of Energy, Indigenous Affairs, and the Premier of Alberta, and maybe the Premier of BC. Look, we are going nowhere with these court cases, with these pipeline protests. Let's work out an arrangement where we all win. And I think that's doable. Industry is starting to come. Right. Because they know without a deal being done, they're not going to get much activity happening.
We sit there and we look at the fact that, okay, you have oil in Alberta and you want to get it to market.
To Tidewater, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of your markets is in the United States, which is becoming a diminishing market. And so, for you to have a market, you have to get to Tidewater, which is another way of you saying you're not opposed to the Kinder Morgan project. As a matter of fact, you need it.
We need a Kinder Morgan project, but I think this is where I and Ian have had some differences. I think he's going to the wrong location for Tidewater access, simply because it's a very controversial location. Really, what we're looking for here is this would be an example. Indigenous peoples, First Nations can become owners, owners of the pipeline, owners of terminals, owners of boats, the whole water safety the whole water safety initiative,
and emergency response.
Emergency response can be done by First Nations. So those are ideas I think that are out there, and this is the partnership I think that First Nations need to have with each other. Alberta First Nations, BC First Nations, coming together and basically, really becoming the champions for Canada. I think it's really our turn to do that.
Now, you wrote recently that there are a number of environmental groups who have attached their agendas to that of First Nations, but you argue that is also standing in your way.
Well, First Nations are natural environmentalists. I mean, we've been at this game for a long, long time.
Men and women of the earth.
Men and women of the earth. I mean, we're the natural stewards of the environment. So taking that situation, and there are those of us, who are developers who want to see. With the resource base that's out there, which is ours, basically, still ours, whether it's oil and gas or whatever. I
know the courts have said so.
The Colton case says it's still our land, and so really, I think there's and obviously, the environmentalists could be partners in this arrangement. If you look at what's happened in Norway, how they got there. They became the wealthiest country on a per capita basis in the world, basically, is they got everybody together. They got the indigenous peoples, the environmentalists, they got the corporations, they got the government, all in one room. And they made an arrangement, they made the deal. They have ships, they've got offshore they got offshore drilling locations offshore. People are fishing in those waters. So there's a way to figure this out. And really, I think that's where we need to go. There's science out there, there's technology out there that can make that happen. So, no question, the Jane Fondas of this world, the Capras of this world have basically, come along and made got a lot of attention because they flew in one day and looked over the oil sands projects along with some chiefs. I mean, that's fine, but it doesn't put food on the table. It does not put any results in our community. So I say we work with the environmental groups, whether they're First Nations or non-First Nations, and as well as First Nations. Let's come to an understanding that we need each other. We got to work with each other, and the same thing applies to the government. So it's. Do
you think that's going to be possible with a number of environmental groups and some of those First Nations who have said we're going to stand our ground here?
Well, you know what? There's First Nations out there who have told the environmental groups, buzz, we don't need you. We can manage this ourselves. I don't think that's the kind of a discussion I could have. I have...
No, because then it becomes acrimonious. Exactly. And that doesn't do anybody any good anyways.
Exactly. I have had discussions with Stuart Phillip, of course. I know them, and we can talk. So I think there's potential here for some kind of an agreement that we can make this happen with a view that there's dangers all around. There's dangers in oil, there's dangers in other issues, but I think there's technology out there now that can avoid and mitigate a lot of these potential dangers that could impact the waters, impact the environment. But I think we can have zero tolerance on those kinds of issues.
You maintain that with First Nations as partners, not just as consenters, that we can find that way forward and that everybody wins.
That's the key. Yeah. That is the key, Stuart. The key is that First Nations, Indigenous people are getting a piece of the action, and that money is not going to the coffers of the BC coffers or the Alberta coffers or the government coffers in Ottawa, and then it's trickled back down to us, and we have to go hat in hand. That's the most demeaning way of looking after people. And basically, it was done purposely because that's the way we could. That's colonization. Yeah. That's control, and that basically is. You know, and I get a little upset sometimes when our leaders tend to go that way again, and I say, you know what, let's cut that off. Let's control our own destiny.
There's that wonderful line in I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King where he talks about the fact that it seems impossible for him to comprehend that we can have islands of poverty in this vast ocean of prosperity. Why can it not be shared? And it's something that when I hear that, I think it's so beautifully put, and why should there be these pockets of poverty only based on our past? Let's tear those walls down.
If there's a country who could be an example of that, to make that happen, is Canada. Because I think we're a tolerant country. It's a fair country, as John Ralston Saul called Canada. The U.S., basically, the government took over First Nations lands, Indian lands in Canada, in the U.S., with wars. Basically, it was massacres back and forth. Right. And in Canada, it's been done by dialogue. We negotiated treaties with the Canadian government, and those treaties are still going. There's treaties still being negotiated in BC, and even those in other parts of the country, those treaties are not quite done. So there's continuing dialogue. So I really believe that this country can be an example to the world on how they treat Aboriginal peoples in this country. A country of great example, of course, is New Zealand. And here you've got representation in House of Commons, representation in Parliament, where the Maori economy is 17-20% of the economy, right? And their economy is booming.
That's because they have ownership.
Because they have ownership. Yeah. Because they have a seat in power. They have seats. They have seats in power in the country. So, to me, that's where the rubber has to meet the road. Where we start sharing power, we start sharing resources, and we will hijack this poverty issue big time.
Because ultimately it comes back to the individuals who are living in those communities where they are destitute. And we are robbing them of the opportunity to realize their potential as human beings.
Big Bear, my great-grandfather, who stood out, who would not sign a treaty with the government, believed in individual power, individual freedom. He believed that the only way you're going to build a community, a country, is empowering the individual.
Yes.
And without that individual being empowered to be able to lift himself or herself up, you're basically going to have a system of dependency and backwardness forever. And that's what's got to happen. We got to lift the individual people in our communities.
Aristotle points out that if just one person does not become fully realized as a human being, then something is lost to all of humanity. And we can't have that. And I think that you're absolutely right. It is having access to opportunity that creates jobs and gives people the opportunity to realize their full potential.
Exactly.
I wish you the best of luck. Thank you very much for coming in and doing this.
Thanks very much. Appreciate that.